Hi, this is Chicano Darks and welcome to my channel.
It's a story about American paranoia at the border, about a toxic campaign of disinfection and discrimination, and a U.S. practice that would go on to inspire Nazi scientists.
Until the 1920s, crossing the border was not heavily restricted and it was actually not illegal. Lots of domestic laborers and farm workers actually crossed through Mexico and the US with facility. But due to the Mexican Revolution that happened through 1910 and 1917, the US saw a huge increase of Mexican immigration into the United States. This provoked feelings of animosity and xenophobia among white Americans that lived along the border. And this was heightened through things like growing patriotism and paranoia from World War I. The city's newly elected mayor in El Paso, Texas, Thomas Callaway Lee Jr., actually stoked racist fears of lazy, destitute, dirty Mexicans bringing in typhus and other diseases. And in 1916, he demanded a quarantine be put in place.
El Paso's mayor, Tom Lee, had developed an obsession with cleanliness, and it defined his political platform. One of Mayor Lee's biggest fears was a disease called typhus, spread by lice. So, under the pretense of sanitary betterment work, he helped lead a campaign to inspect every house in a predominantly Mexican neighborhood. If the inspectors found lice, occupants were forced to take vinegar and kerosene baths, have their heads shaved, and clothing burned. Hundreds of homes were eventually destroyed.
Lloyd, the public service health official, actually responded to these claims opposing, saying that typhus fever will not now and will probably never be a serious menace to the civilization of the United States. But Lloyd said that he would endorse disinfection stations, reiterating the same language that Lee had previously used, saying that he would be willing to bathe and disinfect all the dirty, lousy people who are coming into the country from Mexico. Lloyd and U.S. officials agreed to start setting up disinfection stations in El Paso. This process was both dangerous and humiliating. Men and women would be directed towards different facilities, separated, and would be made to strip. Officials would then examine them while they were nude and douse them with chemicals like kerosene and toxic pesticides. If a woman was suspected to have lice, her hair would also be doused in kerosene and in vinegar. These stations started popping up all throughout the Mexican and U.S. border.
In this facility, every immigrant considered a second-class citizen had to strip naked. Their clothes were sent to a large steam dryer and then fumigated with toxic pesticides inside the gas room. An inspector would check each person's body, including private parts, for lice. If they found lice, immigrants would have to shave their head and body hair and bathe in a mix of kerosene and vinegar. Some even had their eyelids checked for things like pink eye, and many had to complete puzzles or simple IQ tests to prove that they were fit for entry. After this process, they'd receive a ticket as proof that they were disinfected, but they would need to go through this every 8 days in order to re-enter the U.S.
Although the U.S. government is thought to have bathed about 123,123 Mexican Americans, and this is just in the El Paso border. Some migrants feared losing their life burning to death in these baths because in a previous incident, 25 people did lose their life because someone lit a match near these stations. Women also went into this with fear as they heard that workers at these facilities like to photograph the women. And keep in mind that this process was done in the nude, adding even more humiliation on top of everything that they're going through. After hearing this, a 17-year-old Carmelita Torres refused to get off the trolley when she got to the border of Santa Fe. Carmelita Torres refused to submit to a bath, and quickly her and her fellow passengers who were also women, and lots of them were girls, and domestic workers there, quickly seized 4 trolleys and were hurling anything that they could find towards U.S. officials. A number of Juarez residents joined into the protest/riot, which lasted 3 days. And it grew from about 200 to about 2,000 people very quickly. As for Carmelita, she was arrested right after the protest, or during, we're not really sure. And we actually don't even know what happened to her afterwards. Although the riot did manage to shut down the border for a couple of days, these campaigns still happened for decades and actually went on to inspire Nazi scientists. These dangerous baths continued well into the 1960s. In 1938, a German scientist by the name of Dr. Gerhard Peters actually wrote an article where he featured photos of El Paso baths, where he was calling for the same tactics to be applied in Nazi Germany chambers. Peters became the managing director of the company that supplied Zyklon B to concentration camps, which is a hydrocyanic acid that in its stronger version is used to exterminate things like rats and mice. Peters learned about the use of this chemical in Mexican-American border baths, and they began to use this chemical in Nazi gas chambers in 1941. He was ultimately convicted of war crimes in Nuremberg, but was ultimately let free. Zyklon B was used in concentration camps to murder lots of people, millions of people.
In the 1930s, Germany's Nazi government would find further inspiration from the United States in developing its eugenics policies right here in the borderland.
Up until 1937, when El Paso gets a visit from a group of German scientists. And they're visiting because their government got word that there is a city on the US-Mexico border that's doing an amazing job at sanitizing their migrants. So they are told, go, copy the lists of chemicals that they use, copy the buildings and the way they look, these brick buildings with towers in the middle, men to the left, women to the right. Copy the types of agents that they use. And they do. And they compile a massive science journal and go back to Germany.
Borderland historian David Varela says the next year, in 1938, Nazi Germany opened its first concentration camp, Dachau.
Parts of it are modeled after the bathhouses of South El Paso Street, down to using. Do you remember that white gas that was sprayed on you after you were done with your bath? That was Zyklon B, the same exact chemical that was used in concentration camps all over Europe to murder millions of people in gas chambers.
It is still unclear what lasting health impacts affected any Mexican Americans that went through these baths. Sadly, this is not the first time, and most likely not the last, that other countries have taken inspiration from the US to commit these atrocities. So guys, stay vigilant and pay attention to history, because sadly, it does tend to repeat itself. So yeah guys, please stay vigilant, and that was today's History's Missing Chapter. Goodbye.